John Wesley was born to an Anglican priest and a mother who raised him with a deep respect for religion and Christian morals. From his earliest breath, John seemed destined for a life dedicated to the church. When he left home, he enrolled at Oxford, where he and his brother Charles studied to become priests. During their time in school, they founded a small group whose members vowed to live holy lives, free from sin. They focused on practical steps they could take to follow the Bible's teachings, and they committed to things like taking communion once a week, praying daily, fasting on Wednesdays and Fridays, and regularly visiting prisoners and the sick. Other students mockingly labeled them the Holy Club, a name that John and the others chose to embrace. It was in this holy club that John Wesley laid the first foundations for what would become Methodism. Despite his good works, his studies, and his dedication to living a holy life, John struggled with feeling close to God. He believed on an intellectual level, but he felt that he had never experienced God in a more personal way. Nevertheless, John continued to pursue a holy life. He would spend part of each morning reading the Bible and meditating on its meaning. One morning, he read from Mark 12, where Jesus says, "You aren't far from God's kingdom." These words troubled him. He didn't feel close to God's kingdom at all. That same night, he was at a meeting on Aldersgate Street in London when someone there began to read aloud from an essay by Martin Luther. The words Luther wrote connected with John on a deep level. That night he wrote in his journal that he had felt his heart strangely warmed, and that, for the first time, felt he trusted in Christ. He felt confident about his faith and believed that his sins had been forgiven. This moment, known as the Aldersgate experience, was a turning point in John Wesley's life and renewed his passion to preach the gospel. Soon after, one of John's friends and a member of the Holy Club, George Whitefield, asked him to preach. Whitefield was an open-air preacher who took his sermons outside the walls of the church to preach to everyday people in the fields or by the rivers or at the mines, wherever he could find them. John was initially nervous about the invitation because of the non-traditional nature of open-air preaching, but eventually he grew to embrace it and began to travel far and wide, preaching in the open to anyone who would listen. A lot of people came out to listen to John's sermons, and many began to follow him. They would seek his advice and ask him to weigh in on religious matters. Yet he never intended to start a new denomination. John remained a priest in the Anglican Church until his death. Nevertheless, his movement thrived, and he began to pass on the practices that he and his friends had undertaken in the Holy Club at Oxford. The movement grew and grew, and soon critics began to mockingly call them Methodists, a slur against the methodical nature of their piety, but a name which the members gladly embraced. Over time, the Methodist movement continued to expand, not only in England, but across the Atlantic as well. Lay preachers carried the traditions of John Wesley and the Methodists into the American colonies, and here it took hold and flourished.